Like many of you, I've been putting so many hours into Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And while a million things have already been said and a million more could be said, I want to focus on just one little slice right now. It's one of the many improvements from Breath of the Wild, but it's a little detail that's not in a lot of games, or at least not many games that I've played, and most often it wasn't quite pulled off in a way that works. For a second, let's go back to Breath of the Wild. You're on a mission to stop Ganon, and to do so, you can go to the four corners of the map to rally your troops of giant glorified lasers, but to do that, you'll have to save that town from destruction from the giant mech terrorizing the area. The Gorons have volcanic activity, the Zora have perpetual rain, so on and so forth. And when you reprogram the giant mech, the environment changes to reflect that. Gerudo? I think it's Gerudo. They just said it in the game and I forgot already. Gerudo Desert no longer is suffering from a perpetual sandstorm. So the player's actions directly impact the world's environment to have permanent changes. It's written into the story. Normally, I love this. I love when I can change the environment of a game and really leave an impact on the world I'm escaping to. It helps the world to come alive. But it didn't quite work in Breath of the Wild for me. It didn't really feel right. I don't know how else to describe it than that. But I'll get to that. Let me give you another example. In Breath of the Wild, there's an optional side quest that eventually has you helping to found a town that wasn't there before. I absolutely love this concept, and I know for many people this series of side quests were their favorite in the whole game, but it still felt a bit underwhelming to me. Don't get me wrong, I love Breath of the Wild, I have over 1,000 hours into it, and Tarrey Town was one of my favorite parts too. But it doesn't give me the prideful swelling in my chest that creating a whole town from nothing should have. But Jess, if that's what you want, go play Animal Crossing or Sims or Roller Coaster Tycoon. Yeah, I hear you, and I have over 1,000 hours into Animal Crossing too. I loved celebrating my first pandemic birthday 2 days after Animal Crossing released with friends, who all came and planted flowers on my island. It's one of my favorite birthday memories. And these sim games are great for allowing player decisions to impact environment. But that's not the whole of it either. I still selfishly want a bit more, and I know I'm not the only one if the size of the Minecraft player base is any testament. I want an RPG that lets me, the player, be more than just a passerby through this world that I'm most likely trying to save. I want my decisions to have weight. I want more than just a scripted sandstorm that goes away once I've cleared whatever mission. I want to be able to boot up my game, and you boot up your game, and when we compare them we can clearly see whose is whose. As a side note, so many of you have asked me to continue through Outer Wilds. I DNF'd it even though it checked so many of my boxes. Exploration, check. Amazing story you have to piece together yourself, check. Little secrets you only uncover by looking in every nook and cranny and thinking on your toes, check. And while not necessarily a requirement that will make or break a game for me, the music and art style is some of my favorite I've seen in a long time. But I couldn't get through it. I love the game, I really, really do. I can see the amount of love that the developers put into it, and I appreciate games like Outer Wilds so much. I'm just not the player for it. I could appreciate it, and I loved watching people play it, but I myself couldn't. And really, the fact that I didn't enjoy myself knowing that I should have frustrated me to the point that I took a really long break from gaming altogether. But I figured out why. It's the same issue I have with a lot of games, and the same reason why way back in my first few hours of Breath of the Wild, I was so terrified of blood moons. Everything I did kept coming undone. My impact had no impact. All of the work I did reset back to the default world, and the only way to progress is to do it all over again. Now obviously, the blood moon has a way smaller impact, it's just a respawn timer. But for someone who just took down their first Lynel, only for it to respawn 4 minutes later, it's a bit frustrating. I just cleared this enemy camp, let me have a few moments of pride pretending I'm actually saving Hyrule from the blight of these monsters, please. I mean, in Breath of the Wild, tell me you didn't avoid more enemy camps than you cleared. There was barely any reward worth it for clearing 4 bokoblins and a moblin, and they were just gonna respawn in a few minutes anyway. And that's what I mean. If I'm saving Hyrule, let me feel like I'm saving Hyrule. I'm going to switch gears and talk about the new Zelda, and while I'm going to talk about mostly early to mid-game spoilers, there is one big spoiler that I want to talk about. I'll save that one for last. There's a timestamp on screen to avoid the early spoilers, and I'll give another heads up before we go into the big one. or you can come back once you've progressed in the game. This is a great time to mention that your support for my ramblings means so much, and I'd love to see you back. Subscribing is free, and just lets me know you care about these topics as much as I do. Tears of the Kingdom made this impact on the world feel better. Sure, most of it is still scripted and there is still a blood moon, but the path to achieve it makes each step feel like progress. Let me explain. If you've started the Regional Phenomena quest, I bet most of you thought, oh, so this is just the 4 Divine Beasts again, which is exactly what I thought too. Cool, okay. For me, I did Rito first just because the game was pushing me in that direction, then Goron, then Zora, then Gerudo. And it felt very samey at first. I mean, most Zelda games have this quest, something is happening at this race, go investigate and fix it. But then I found Tulin, and boy does his personality annoy me. I miss Ravioli, but the path just to get to the temple felt like each bounce was progress. I could see the big windstorm I was heading to, I could see the little speck of a mountain I started from, I could see the progress I was making and slaying enemies the whole way there. Not once did I get a blood moon while on that path. And then I bounced my way up to the center of the storm, and a whole temple was waiting there for me. Not a divine beast, a proper mini temple. And real quick, I, among many of us, were pretty disappointed with the Divine Beasts. It was a major complaint in Breath of the Wild having no temples, but I thought the trade-off for shrines was fine. As an adult, my play sessions are much shorter than they were as a kid, so the micro-puzzles were a bonus for me. But the Divine Beasts, they were just tedious for the sake of, well, we need something bigger than a shrine.
Yo! What? Is it a dungeon? It's a temple! There's temples in the game! Oh my god! Yo! I'm so happy! Oh my god! Oh my god, it's Zelda! Oh my god! Yeah! Hell yeah! Wow, this is what was waiting for us in that huge cloud. This is gonna take us forever, guys, by the way.
Tears of the Kingdom's temples don't feel like that. Sure, they're not as sprawling as in previous games, but the puzzles definitely are better than the Divine Beasts were. I distinctly remember one where you've got, like, cog wheels and you're trying to make them connect. And at some point I'm like, I give up, I don't know how to solve this, I'm just gonna use an icicle to connect them. It felt wrong, it felt like cheating, surely there was some beam of wood I had missed somewhere or something, but oh well. After I finished the temple, it was bugging me so much, so I looked up a guide to see how it was supposed to be solved, and no, I did exactly how the game intended. As a side note to my side note, this is part of my point, I promise, but I just want to mention how incredible I felt during the boss fight of the Rito Temple. It is by far my favorite boss fight of any Zelda game ever. I've found everyone's got a slightly different boss fight technique, but mine was to wait until he warped right below you, and then dive forward, and then bullet time the crystal targets as he rose up next to me. It was the most badass I've felt as a gamer in a long time, and it was scripted. This game just feels really good. And I was talking to my sister, Artemis on Twitch, you should go follow her. But I was talking to my sister after I beat it, asking her where she was, because she was slightly behind me in progress. And she's like, I almost beat the Wind Temple. I'm almost to the center of the storm. And of course I didn't want to spoil it for her and let her know she hadn't even gotten to the temple yet, but that's the side point I'm trying to make. She thought the path to the temple was the temple. That's how good the progress feels. Just drown me in all of those good brain chemicals. Having that visual cue of progress, whether it's being able to see the distance traversed, or even something as simple as an enemy's health bar depleting, that cue is so important. It lets the player know that their actions, their gameplay, has an impact. So sure, all of those monsters and constructs I cleared out of the temple will respawn at the Blood Moon, but then, the icing on the cake was watching the environment change as a direct result of my progress. The best one, in my opinion, was the Gerudo's area. And I know what you're thinking, it's just the same sandstorms as in Breath of the Wild, and I suppose technically you're right, I mean it is all the same assets, but the implication, the impact, was so much more powerful this time around. Now, if you didn't do the Gerudo area yet, I'd recommend coming back after you have. This isn't the big spoiler I mentioned earlier, but it is worth it not to be spoiled for this one, too, in my opinion. Timestamp again for convenience. So the Gerudo Desert. Yes, it's just a sandstorm. You're not wrong. But why did it feel so much more impactful this time around? So both in Zelda and in real life, I hate sand. It just gets everywhere. Walking in it kills the muscle near my shins. It's just not my idea of a great time. And I was not feeling ready enough to handle a Molduga without the Bomb Sheikah rune, so I just hover biked my way there instead. But because of this, I had no idea the monsters that would greet me there. No little teaser enemy camp along the way, just biking my way there, pit stopping in the oasis. And let me tell you, that mushroom thing in the oasis intrigued me so much. I tried climbing it, hitting it, bombing it, everything I could think of to interact with this thing, but nothing worked. It drove me nuts for a good 20 minutes until, as often with this game, I got distracted by something else. So eventually I hopped back on my hover bike and headed for Gerudo Town. And I love the architecture in Gerudo Town. It's such a melting pot of inspiration from so many cultures, Indian, Arabic, Mediterranean. It might be my favorite culture in Zelda despite the sand. The water system through Gerudo Town is gorgeous. But that's not what I found. The waterways were dried, the streets were ransacked, rubble everywhere, not a soul in sight. Until the first shambling corpse stood. Now remember, I did not encounter any enemies on my way in. I did not know Gibdos were back. And as this thing crawled its way to its feet and started shuffling towards me, I did what no gamer should and I panicked. I missed every single arrow and then just button mashed when it got into melee range. And none of my wild, unaimed, untimed swings did anything, barely a scratch, so I climbed up as far away as I could to come up with a plan. And the plan is always bombs. It's Zelda. Don't act like your plan B is anything but bombs. Which worked, of course, as always, because it's Zelda. So after I finally take it down, and had a second to breathe, I immediately called my sister, who at this point had already done Gerudo area, and I said in what I can only assume was the most pitiful, defeated voice, Gibdos. Artem's consolatory, yes, Gibdos, was the only appropriate response. And that was the entire conversation. So of course, I have to save my beautiful Gerudo Town. I have to restore it to its glory. Yeah, Sandstorm again, but Gibdos? Not in my Hyrule. So now here's where the idea for this topic really struck me. Would have picked up on the Gibdo invasion sooner had I walked through the desert, but the developers knew there were players like me, so they left a little hint for me even before I found my first Gibdo. That mushroom that drove me crazy. Now, we know it's a hive, but again, even when I felt like my way of playing the game wasn't the right way, skipping the entire journey to the oasis and then to the town. No, go right ahead. This is your game experience, and it's definitely just a sandstorm, wink wink. So here's a decimated town, and my fellow gingers have adapted, surviving in the holes underground. And the path to the temple is one filled with micro-war planning, mini-battles, and ridding the town of these foul beasts. Little by little, we rally the troops to take back their homes. And as we finally push back on the invasion, we get this little breathing room to go find the temple, the source of this scourge. So we go through and we take down the boss, and while the boss fight wasn't nearly as badass as my good Buzzy... this fucking joke. And while the boss fight wasn't nearly as badass as my good buddy Raspberry Mint Colgate, the impact of saving that town felt just as good. Inside the city walls, where Gibdos scared the pants off me, then occupied by the strongest soldiers, now was bustling with vendors and children playing. Oh, and Hudson's little girl is here too. Which, as much as Terrytown was a bit underwhelming to me in the last game, it was much more satisfying this time around. Not only can I buy a house, mine is literally just entirely weapon displays, don't judge me, but I can help Kilton with his monster display. I've had entirely way too much fun playing with the monster displays. Pro tip, whatever position the monster is in when you take the picture is exactly the position the statue will be in. Do with that information what you will. And Laurelin Village? Man, it was one of my favorite side quests. Not just because it's another clear the enemy camp, but because I really did feel like I cleared it. These won't respawn with the Blood Moon. I haven't saved Hyrule yet, but at least I know Laurelin is safe. Again, my actions have a lasting impact on the world. If I'm a savior, let me be a savior. Let my actions be permanent and irreversible. And of course I understand the need for respawning enemies. Of course I understand. Let me be clear, I know games need to have respawning enemies. The world needs to reset, not just for the good of the game's economy, but also to help debug. I get it. But not for all situations. Some, like Laurelin, Gerudo Town, feel so good to save them once and for all. And Laurelin really does make you feel like a savior. I get free lunch every time I visit now. That's how a savior should be treated. I don't think that's asking too much. Zelda never made me a grilled cheese, but Hateno gives me all the cheese I'll ever need for pizza. My actions in Tears of the Kingdom matter. Let me give one last example to really drive the point home. Now, this is the major spoiler, so if you have not even thought about the Master Sword yet, I appreciate you sticking around this long, but you need to go away now. Seriously, I'm telling you, you do not want that spoiled. So anyone still here has agreed that they know about the Master Sword spoiler. You know the one. And please understand that I have not yet finished the story beyond the Master Sword and the four corners of regional phenomena. So if I misspeak here, it is out of ignorance, not negligence. Please no spoilers in the comments, because not only do I spoil myself when I have to go in and delete it, but others who may just be browsing through. I love how strict the Zelda community has been on spoilers, and I so appreciate you all keeping it that way. It truly did make this video possible. Alright, so I, like many, spent so much time early on riding dragons because why wouldn't you? They're a great way to map the underground for scaredy cats like me, and they have some great fuse materials. And I, like many, saw the light dragon way off in the distance when exploring the intro Sky Island. I never put two and two together, but retrospectively, it was right in front of our face all along. But the slow build-up, the slow realization as you go through the geoglyphs, and then that confirmation, that last gut punch, it was so good. Never before has the Master Sword actually felt like the Master Sword, the sword that seals the darkness. Much like the temples, the path there was a ride. It was a journey. These geoglyphs, and then the tier, then finally making your way to the light dragon if you hadn't already. And when you do finally lay hands on the hilt, it feels like you've well and truly earned it. Now, this isn't an environmental change to the world, but there is still some subtle changes that really drill that impact down. After you've earned the Master Sword, from that point on, anytime you're with a dragon, the music ever so slightly changes. It was always beautiful music, but now there's a chorus track alongside. It's so subtle, but every time I hear it, I get goosebumps all over again. I know the implication of these dragons. I know what had to happen for them to exist. Sure, this was not a huge change brought about by my journey, but I did go down on that ride on the story path. It has an impact. It has context. It feels like progress in this game's world. And it can't be ripped away from me by a respawn or a reset. Our experience, our gameplay, our decision to pull that sword matters.